back in the Gospel of Luke and chapter 20. And if you'd like to find that chapter in your Bibles now, I'm going to read from verse 19. Just to give you the context again, Jesus has arrived in Jerusalem. It's the days leading up to his death and suffering, his crucifixion. And as Jesus entered Jerusalem, he cleared the temple courts, creating a real friction, as it were, with the religious leaders who came out to question him. And he responded to their questions with a parable about the tenant farmers and the vineyard, which they recognized was spoken against them. So we're going to pick up from verse 19 and read through to verse 26. The teachers of the law and the chief priests looked for a way to arrest him, that's Jesus of course, immediately, because they knew he had spoken this parable against them. But they were afraid of the people. Keeping a close watch on him, they sent spies who pretended to be sincere. They hoped to catch Jesus in something he said, so that they might hand him over to the power and authority of the governor. So the spies questioned him. "Teacher, we know that you speak and teach what is right, and that you do not show partiality, but teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. Is it right for us to pay taxes to Caesar or not?" He saw through their duplicity and said to them, "Show me a denarius. Whose image and inscription is on it?" "Caesar's," they replied. He said to them, "Then give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's." They were unable to trap him in what he had said there in public. Astonished by his answer, they became silent. The passage that I've just read begins by informing us that the religious leaders of Jesus' day kept a very close watch on him. Now, there can be many reasons why someone would need a close watch placed upon them, or why someone should be watched carefully. When somebody becomes unwell so that they're admitted into hospital, they may well be placed on a vital signs monitor, which measures their blood pressure, their heartbeat, their temperature, and so on, just to keep an eye on them and see what happens. A person suspected of illegal activity could be under police surveillance and watched very closely as well to prevent a crime from taking place or a terrorist act. An anxious parent, of course, concerned about the safety of their child, may place a very careful watch on their son and daughter, maybe put a tracker on their phone so as they travel to and fro from school, they can be sure that they are safe. All sorts of different reasons, good and even bad. But why did these religious leaders watch Jesus so closely? Why were they so concerned to keep an eye on him? So much so that we're told they sent spies. Well, we're told the answer why. They hoped to catch Jesus in something he said so that they might hand him over to the power and authority of the governor. That's the Roman governor who we'll meet, of course, later in the gospel, Pontius Pilate. They hoped they might gather enough evidence against Jesus to condemn him before the Roman authorities. You see, these religious leaders wanted shot of Jesus. They didn't want him in the way anymore. He'd become an inconvenience to them. We read just a few verses earlier at the end of chapter 19 that they were trying to kill him. But they didn't want to kill him themselves, because they knew that the people liked Jesus, and if they were seen to be the perpetrators of his death or his demise, then the people might turn against them. Much better if the Romans killed Jesus. Then the religious leaders are free to carry on doing what they've done without Jesus' interference, and the people can't be angry with them. So they hatch a plan. They plan to send in some of their disciples, some of their people, as it were, to catch Jesus, to mingle with the crowd as he taught them every day in the temple. And this is what we have before us in these verses 20 to 26. This attempt to capture Jesus, to trick Jesus, to trap Jesus, reveals not only how far his enemies will go, and they're going to go much further yet in ensuring his demise, but also we learn a great deal from what Jesus has to say in answer to them, about what he really believed, what he stood for. I wonder if you and I were watched very closely as Jesus was. What would people learn about us? If your life or mine was examined throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the month, would there be enough evidence found to condemn us? Perhaps people might see the hypocrisy of our lives, that we say one thing but we do another when we think we are safe to do so. Maybe they'll find some inconsistency between what we say we believe and how we actually live. Perhaps they might even find out our secret sins, those things that we keep hidden even from our family and friends. Well, let's see how Jesus fares as he is put to the test under close scrutiny by these spies sent by the religious leaders. They come to him with a question which they think is impossible for him to answer without getting himself into some sort of trouble or trap. The question concerns paying taxes to the Roman Emperor Caesar. Verse 22, is it right for us to pay taxes to Caesar or not? This is not just the general taxes that they're talking about. There's a particular poll tax which the other gospel writers mention. You see, Israel at that time was an occupied country. It was part of the Roman Empire, and the Roman Emperor and the Roman Empire had authority over that land. As an occupied nation, they had to pay, each of them, a poll tax to be part of the empire. In reality, every person within the empire actually benefited from the Roman Empire. Though there were many things wrong with it, we know that, there were certainly good things. In the Roman times, roads were built which were safe to travel, unheard of beforehand. The Roman army gave the country some peace. There weren't wars. They weren't going to be invaded by a hostile enemy country with the Romans in charge. There's a phrase that's often used about these times, the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. However, this tax was very unpopular with the Jewish people. They hated the idea that they were ruled by Rome because they had been independent for so many millennia, really. The tax only served, as it were, to rub salt in their national pride, in the wound of their ego. But the truth is that if anybody refused to pay this tax, which was demanded of them by the Roman Empire, they were considered a rebel, a revolutionary who had set themselves against the emperor and the whole empire. And taking such a stand and not paying your tax in that way could lead to your imprisonment and even to your death. So the question that they set before Jesus, in one sense, it seems to be a very important question. But actually, it really isn't. They aren't really concerned to find out the truth about how they should live under this Roman Empire and how they should behave. We know, of course, that this is a trap set by the religious leaders after much thought. This is how they imagined the trap to run. If Jesus was to say, yes, it is right to pay tax to Caesar, then the people, the ordinary people, the Jewish people of the day, would turn against Jesus and consider him a collaborator with the enemy. He would lose his popularity, which would solve one of the problems that the Jewish religious leaders had. But if Jesus said, no, you shouldn't pay tax to the Roman emperor, then his enemies, these religious leaders, could go and tell the Roman governor that Jesus was teaching rebellion and was about to lead a revolution against the empire. That certainly would get him strung up. So we may be thinking, as Jesus listens to that question and considers his answer, that actually he is more concerned, or most concerned, about how to get out of this fix. We might think that Jesus is very concerned to answer in such a way that will protect himself from either of these options, losing popularity with the people or getting into trouble with the Romans. Surely he wants to do both. He wants to keep popular and he also wants to keep out of trouble. But that isn't the reason why Jesus answered as he did. He isn't motivated with a concern for his own well-being or popularity or what people think of him. He's not interested in those things at all. Did you notice that at the beginning of the spies' question, they begin to flatter Jesus? Always beware of people who flatter you. They're very likely after something other than the truth. The spies questioned him, "Teacher, we know that you speak and teach what is right, and that you do not show partiality, but teach the way of God in accordance with the truth." Though they were saying them in a flattering way, those things were completely true of Jesus. He was always consistent. He always spoke what was true, no matter what the possible outcome might be. Right at the very beginning of his ministry in Luke chapter 4, when he teaches in his local synagogue, his words so enraged the hearers there that they seek to drive him off a cliff and kill him. He wasn't afraid to speak against the norm. And later on, when he's questioned by Pilate in that kangaroo court, as it were, before his execution, Jesus has no qualms in admitting that he is the rightful ruler, the king of the Jews. For Pilate asks him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus replies, "You've said so." What about you and me? Are we motivated by fear of what people will think of us, or say of us, or do to us? Do we couch our language and our actions so that we seek to please as many people as possible and keep them on our side? Are we less than our true selves before the world, before strangers, before friends and family? Well, dear friends, are we like Christ? Those who are faithful to live and to teach what we know is God's way. So if Jesus isn't concerned about wriggling out of the trap, as it were, that the spies had set for him, what he has to say here is of very real importance, not only to them, but significance to us. This is not simply, therefore, a political question or a tax question, because Jesus is speaking the truth and using the opportunity that the question has given him to present the truth. This is something helpful. It's a helpful thing for us as well as Christians when people come to question us and bring their sometimes genuine questions, if we're honest, often disingenuous questions. We mustn't just shun them and push them away. These may be and are opportunities for us to present the real truth, the truth of the world as it is. So what does Jesus do in his answer? Well, first of all, he asks for a coin. "Show me a denarius." A denarius was a silver coin minted by the Roman Empire. It was worth the equivalent of a day's work for a labourer in a farm or a field or a vineyard or whatever. It was only with a denarius, with the Roman currency, that you could pay the Roman tax. You couldn't pay it with any other coins. There were other coins, of course, in circulation. In the next chapter, we read about a widow who has 2 small copper coins. There were different types of coinage being used for trading, but only Roman coins would do for paying Roman taxes. And this denarius was, as it were, the pound of the day. It was the currency of the day. Every coin had upon it an image, a stamped image of the emperor of that time, and the emperor of this time was a man called Tiberius Caesar. He was emperor from AD 14 to AD 37. And also there was an inscription on this coin which said, Tiberius Caesar Augustus, son of the divine Augustus, because emperors in the Roman Empire were considered to be gods. So before Jesus gives them this answer, he asks them, can you identify the image, the person whose stamp is upon this coin, whose picture is upon this coin? And they all reply correctly, Caesar's, the emperor's, the ruler. The point that Jesus is making is very simple. For he says to them, therefore give to Caesar what is Caesar's. It's a simple enough thing, isn't it? If this coin has Caesar's image on it, it obviously belongs to him. And you should give to Caesar what is rightfully his. However, of course, that's not the end of the argument. That's not the end of the answer that Jesus gives, not the end of the discussion. He's got a far more important and far more far-reaching thing to say as well. He goes on to say, give to God what is God's. Or give to God what belongs to God. What's at the heart of this answer? Apart from a true declaration of what Jesus believed, what is it that Jesus is getting at? What is he saying to these people? And what is he saying to us? See, in the world in which we live, many people see a division, a separation between what we might call the secular and the spiritual. There's a part of our lives which is very ordinary, physical, material. Even as Christians, we can be tempted at times to look at our lives and the world in which we live in a divisive way. There's the ordinary and there's the spiritual. There's the earthly and the heavenly. See, ordinary life is made up of everything that everybody else, all people in the world, are concerned about and interested in and partake of. There's the ordinary life, which of course includes our job and our work, earning our keep, paying our bills, paying our taxes, looking after our family and our friends, enjoying our hobbies and pleasures and sports and so on. Those are all the secular part. They're all the ordinary part, the earthly part of our lives. But then there is the spiritual part of our lives. Something which is unique to each and every person. Unique particularly to those who have faith, whatever their religion. So acts of worship, whether that be in a church or in a mosque or a synagogue or wherever, prayer, reading of sacred or religious writings, fasting, giving to charity, good works. There's the spiritual part as well. And in the thinking of many people, these two worlds are separate from one another. They are two halves that do not touch or impact one another. You can go on and live your life, as it were, in the physical without any reference to the spiritual if you want to. That's a totally false view of the world. Totally false view of life. And of course, in our day and age, in our present society in the UK in the 21st century, we are living in an increasingly secular society where we only view life through the lens of the physical and the material. Everything in life really could be encapsulated within the five senses, what we see and hear and taste and touch and smell. Anything that cannot be experienced by these senses to make us feel happy or sad or whatever it may be, well, we can dismiss either as non-existent or unreal or just imaginary. Perhaps the very reason that Jesus chose a coin to illustrate his answer is, of course, that a coin is one with two halves, two sides, but inseparably one. You can't have half a coin. Well, you could if you cut it sort of that way across, but you can't have just one face of the coin. You have to have both. Every person is both physical and spiritual at the same time. And everything that we do physically has spiritual repercussions and vice versa. So Jesus' answer to this seemingly secular question about tax, money, politics, is evidence that he believes that life is much, much more than just these things. We ignore the spiritual at our peril, quite literally. So the coin, the denarius coin, bore the image of Caesar. As in one sense to prove that it was Caesar's, that it belonged to the Roman Empire. It had this inscription written around it as well, as I said, declaring him to be a divine son. So that everybody who saw it knew this coin is part of the Roman Empire. This coin belongs firstly to the emperor. When Jesus says, give to God what is God's, he is bringing us to remember that we as human beings bear the image of God, our Creator. In Genesis chapter 1 and verse 26, we're told God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. Jesus believed that. In one sense, this is what he's saying, because he quotes from that passage elsewhere when he teaches about marriage and divorce. What is God's must be given to God, for it belongs to God. You and I belong to God. We are his, created by him, with his stamp and image upon us. Therefore, all that is me and all that is you, every part of our lives, however we separate them up, belongs to God and must be given to God. Even the most atheistic person would have to say that looking at human beings, they see something which is far and beyond their understanding. And looking at humanity, we see people and creatures that are far beyond any animal. No matter what our evolutionary science and thoughts may be, humans are totally different to any chimpanzee or gorilla or ape. We may have hands and feet. We may have eyes and hair. But we are definitely different. A mannequin in a shop window has eyes and hair and feet and hands. But one is a living being with a soul, and one is not. When Jesus says, give to God what is God's, he's reminding the people here and reminding us that life, all that we have, has been given us by God, that we might give it back to him. You see, whenever we fail to live in that way, with our lives devoted to God, given to our Creator, with him at the center of them, whenever we fail to live in that way, that's when we are in sin. Sin is just that, the refusal to give to God what belongs to God. It's to reject who we are and reject who God is. And our sin has a physical and it has spiritual consequences. Sin destroys life in this world. It destroys relationships. It's at the core of all war and all crime and all hatred and all violence and all injustice. But sin has very real spiritual consequences in our relationship with God. It brings us into a place of condemnation before God. It brings us into a place of rebellion and enmity with God. And it causes us to be in that place of eternal separation from God. Unless something is done about it. Is your life lived as a life that belongs to God? Is your life lived as a life dependent upon God? Whether you realize it or not, you are. Every breath you breathe, God gives. Every beat of your heart is because God allows it and gives it life to beat. Every step you take is because God gives you the strength. Whether you recognize it or not, this is the truth. Because there comes a point in every person's life when the heart stops beating and the lungs stop breathing and the legs stop working. See, Jesus came into the world to give himself to God. He is God, and he is one with God the Father, and he lived a life of perfect obedience to God, but he came to give his life. As he says elsewhere, he came not to be served, but to serve and give himself as a ransom for many. Jesus gave himself to the Father when he was offered up on the cross and suffered and died, so that we might be reconciled to God, so that we might be given back to God and brought back to God our Maker. It's only through Jesus that we can come to God, for he has said, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And in coming to God through Jesus, then we begin to live the life we were created for, the life God has intended us to live. The life of fullness, here, beginning now, and into eternity. In Peter's first letter, he writes this: For Christ died for sins once for all, the righteous for the unrighteous, to bring you to God. Why did Jesus come into the world? To teach us right from wrong? No. Why did Jesus come into the world? To show us what love is really like? No. The reason that Jesus Christ came into this world is because God, in his love for you, the people that he has created and made and bear his image and likeness, so that you who were lost and were in rebellion against him might be brought back to him. Brought back to become his child, brought back into his family, brought back into his kingdom, brought back into the experience of his love. What is so tragic in our world today is that men and women are living only for the physical, only for the now, only for the touch, only for the feeling. And that's like being half a person, less than half a person. Until we recognize that we were made for God, then we shall never ever know complete joy, contentment, peace, life. You were made for God. You're only going to be complete when you and God are brought back together. You're only going to be complete when your life is living in relationship with God as you were meant to. Let me urge and encourage you. Let me urge you to come back to God, to give yourself to God. Don't wait until you're good enough, as it were, because you never will be. Give yourself to God, sin and all, that he might cleanse, that he might forgive, that he might restore. Yes, give to Caesar what is Caesar's. Enjoy this world, this creation that God has given us, but give to God what is God's. You are his. Make him yours. The Bible says that to do that, we need to repent of our sin. Turn away from this half cockeyed view of life and see who we are. Not only those who are created in God's image, but those who've fallen and sinned. We need to repent of our sin and turn away from it. Turn our faces again to our Maker and Creator. And thank him that through Jesus there is a way back. A way to life. A way to fullness. Give to God what is God's. We're going to sing as we close our time this morning, reminding ourselves that Jesus is our Creator. Jesus is Lord, the cry that echoes through creation. Jesus is the King, the Lord, the one in whom we can trust. The Lord bless you this week, encourage you, and draw you to himself.